Miles Morales is Miles Morales and Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Now this is something that you'll hear echoed out throughout the comic book community, much to the chagrin of Miles Morales fans. Now this is a video I want to do for a good minute because fans of this character will scream up and down how great of a Spider-Man Miles Morales is, without even properly understanding why they feel that way. You see, they don't like Miles Morales as a character, they like him as a concept. The concept being that he is the Black Spider-Man. I want to go back to a post I made a few days ago where I said the exact same thing. Miles Morales is Miles Morales and Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Tell me I'm lying. And that went about as well as I thought it would. Some people understood what I was saying. Some people, well, they're entitled to their own opinion. But I want to read to you guys some of these comments because some of these opinions are going to tie into what I'm saying in the video. So this person says, Miles is a Spider-Man, but Peter is the Spider-Man, which is the nice way of saying what I said in the post. This next comment is a bit harder to read, but I was basically able to make out what the dude was saying, so I'm gonna read it with the intent that he had, as opposed to how it's actually written. So he writes, "You're lying, like it's a dumb argument because y'all act like Miles Morales is either here to replace Peter Parker or is not Spider-Man. We know who the first Spider-Man is, it's Peter Parker. Miles Morales happens to be Spider-Man as well. We didn't say nothing when Ben Reilly or Miguel O'Hara or anybody else took up the Spider-Man mantle before. For some reason, Miles Morales is a problem when he was created to replace an alternate version of Peter Parker. He wasn't created to replace the Peter Parker. And then they show you how you can still have Miles Morales in the same universe with Peter Parker. It's kind of a dumb argument just to have, and honestly, it makes the fan base look racist as hell, honestly." Wow, pulling out the racist card. I thought you were better than that, my guy.
Evidently not.
Have y'all ever noticed how whenever they call you racist, they can never expand on that point? I don't know, I think that's just kind of weird. Like, you need me to be racist in order to prove your point. But this guy brings up several talking points that Miles Morales apologists like to use when it comes to talking about this character, which we will get into. A Tales Truth says, "So let me get this straight. Even if it isn't Miles, no one can be Spider-Man. Not Gwen, not Miguel, not Peter's kids. Come on, anyone can wear the mask." Now, I will say this. There is a smidgen of truth in what he's saying when he says anyone can wear the mask, but not in the way that he's thinking. I know y'all a bit confused by that, but I promise you all's gonna be revealed. And lastly, Quantel Thompson says, "Can we just let this argument die for both sides? I've just been accepting both for a while now. I see Miles as a Spider-Man, still he should have his own name if he's gonna swing alongside Peter, and Peter as the Spider-Man." And you're right. We are going to put this issue to rest. And the best way to put something to rest is with facts. So let's get it on, shall we? Let's go back to the Ultimate Marvel Universe for a second, which is different from the main Marvel Universe. It was never as popular as the main Marvel Universe, save for one superhero. You guessed it, Spider-Man. Spider-Man was very popular in this universe. People just loved this take on the character during the early 2000s. Sadly, however, as we got closer and closer to the 2010s, Ultimate Spider-Man started to decline in sales, and so they decided maybe it's time we finally kill off Peter Parker. But they didn't just want to kill off Peter Parker. No, they wanted to replace Peter Parker, which of course they did with Miles Morales. The reason I bring this up is because people try to make it seem like they have a point when they're saying, oh well, Miles is just replacing an alternate version of Peter Parker. He's not replacing the Peter Parker. Yes, he's not replacing the 616 Peter Parker, but he's still replacing the Peter Parker of this universe. Miles isn't even the original Spider-Man of this Earth. And it's not like Peter Parker was only Spider-Man for a single issue, then died, then Miles took over. No, Peter Parker had been at this for 160 issues, plus team-ups. And I'd feel the same way if any of the other Spider variants from multiple other universes got replaced with somebody else. Because at the end of the day, that somebody else is not the original of that universe, the original being who I was coming to see. So no, Miles does not get a pass on this at all. But not only that, both Brian Michael Bendis and Axel Alonso, the co-creators of the Miles Morales character, created Miles with the specific intention of replacing Peter Parker with someone of mixed ethnicity due to Obama being the president at the time, as well as Axel Alonso being of mixed ethnicity himself, and so that his little son Tito can see himself as the Spider-Man character. But hey, don't take my word for it. This is an exact quote from him. "When the opportunity arose to create a new Spider-Man, we knew it had to be a character that represents the diversity in background and experience of the 21st century. We have a president of mixed heritage. In fact, I'm of mixed heritage. This is just the world we live in. And despite the fact that both Bendis and Alonso have said that it is not about the character's race, both of them have brought up the character's race any and every time they possibly could whenever they were being interviewed about the Miles Morales character. Even in the Miles Morales comic, they bring up the fact that the new Spider-Man is black, and Miles is like, I don't want to be known as the Black Spider-Man, and he probably wouldn't be, or at the very least not as much, if they had shut up about him being black. But they didn't, and he is, so make of that what you will. Another thing that Miles apologists will say when it comes to their love for this character is that they like his personality and his heroics as Spider-Man, claiming that he is a worthy character to have the Spider-Man title. The problem is, there is nothing about Miles' personality or his heroics as Spider-Man that we haven't seen a billion times before with Peter Parker. Like, we've seen Peter Parker be a nerd, we've seen him willing to do what's right, we've seen him overcome the odds time and time again, we've seen him fall in love, we've seen him go through the motions of high school. Like, there is no difference between Miles and Peter in this regard. So when people say they like how Miles operates as Spider-Man or how he operates when he's not being Spider-Man, what they're really saying is, I like Peter Parker even when he's black. And when you tell people that this is the reason that you like Miles, they'll be like, no, you don't understand. There are all these differences between Miles and Peter, and that's what I like about Miles Morales. And let's talk about some of these differences, shall we? Now, nobody's saying that there aren't any differences between Peter and Miles, but the few differences that they do have are very generic baseline level stuff. So let's talk about the differences, shall we? The differences are, Miles is younger than Peter, okay. Their inner circles differ between one another, so different family, different friends, etc. He has a different costume, that's something. He has 2 additional powers on top of every single power that Peter Parker has. And of course the most obvious, that being that he's black and Peter is white. Alright, let's go over all this. The age difference between Peter and Miles is irrelevant because Peter was a young kid when he first started being Spider-Man, so unless you just like the appeal of Spider-Man being a young teen, then that right there doesn't matter. Their family and friends do differ, so that is a difference, but that isn't a significant enough difference to distance Miles from Peter in a significant way. Like, of course you expect them to have 2 different families. I mean, if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for you, but not for me. Miles' 2 additional powers, his Venom Blast and his invisibility. Again, these do separate Miles from Peter to a degree. However, they also give Miles a massive advantage against the people he goes up against. So, for example, 9 times out of 10, Miles uses his Venom Blast power to win a fight. And at first you might be thinking, well, I don't really see anything wrong with that. It is a part of his arsenal. Why shouldn't he use it? And I wholeheartedly agree with that. The problem is, Miles doesn't have his own rogues gallery. His villains were originally Peter Parker's villains. Even the Prowler is not an original Miles Morales villain. And what I'm getting at here is Peter Parker has taken on these guys without the additional powers. Meanwhile, Miles needs the additional powers, without which he wouldn't be able to do jack shit. We've seen this in the comics, we've seen this in movies, we've seen this in the video game. We've seen all throughout Miles' tenure as Spider-Man that these 2 extra powers give Miles a leg up on the enemies that he comes across, without which he would not be that effective as Spider-Man. And again, Peter never needed these 2 powers to be Spider-Man, but I digress. Miles' costume being different again is not a significant enough change, and him being half black, half Puerto Rican in comparison to Peter Parker being white is again not a significant enough change. I mean, yeah, it's a nice looking costume and black is beautiful, but aside from that, there's nothing there. So yeah, there are differences between these 2 characters, they just aren't big enough to say that he is a completely different Spider-Man, or even a good derivative of Spider-Man. So let me explain. You guys remember that comment I read off earlier, where the dude was talking about how nobody talks about Ben Reilly or Miguel O'Hara?
See, now that's some bullshit.
There is just so much shit to unpack when people try to use this level of argumentation in order to defend Miles Morales as a character. For starters, most Spider-Man derivatives, like Miguel O'Hara, are confined to their own universes, so you can largely ignore them for the sake of the main story in the 616 universe. You can't do that with Miles, or at least not anymore since they brought him over to the 616. Secondly, none of these Spider-Man deviants have been permanently killed off for the sake of some somebody else taking their place. Like, that is just completely unheard of, but they did it, so there you are. Thirdly, each and every one of these Spider-Men, save for Miles himself, has their own identity. So for example, Spider-Man 2099, the Spider-Man of the future, Web-Slinger, Cowboy Spider-Man, Spider-Man Noir, Crime Drama Spider-Man, Spider-Punk, Punk Rocker Spider-Man, and you get the idea. Even Ben Reilly, a genetically engineered clone of the 616 Peter Parker, had his characterization strongly centered around him finding his own identity. What's Miles Morales' identity? That he's the token Spider-Man? I mean, okay, that's nothing to brag about, but alright. Fourthly, characters that do stick around in the 616 universe, like Spider-Woman for example, yeah, those variants do exist in the 616 universe, alongside Peter, but they are largely relegated to the background. They'll come out every once in a while to help Peter Parker out with something, but for the most part they are out of sight and out of mind. But this isn't to say that nobody had any problems with any other Spider-Man deviants before Miles Morales came along. So for example, with the character of Ben Reilly, as I said before, he is a genetically engineered clone of Peter Parker. He has all Peter's abilities and all of his memories. And at one point in time, back when Marvel was on the verge of going bankrupt, they were toying around with the idea of having Ben Reilly permanently replace Peter Parker as Spider-Man, claiming that the Peter that we have been following since Ben's creation was the actual clone, and that the clone Ben Reilly was actually the real Peter Parker. And naturally, people were pretty irate about this decision. So eventually, Marvel set everything back to the way it was. Peter Parker was Spider-Man, Ben Reilly was the clone but also the Scarlet Spider, and all was right with the world. Oh, but this wouldn't be the only time people wouldn't accept change. Remember the Superior Spider-Man? Back when Dr. Octopus switched bodies with Peter Parker? Doc Ock's body was frail and dying, and he devised a plan to switch bodies with Peter Parker. And he succeeds! And though he dies, quote unquote, in Doc Ock's body, he does pass on some parting wisdom to Doc Ock on what it means to be Spider-Man, and Doc Ock promises that he's going to try his best to be the superior Spider-Man. And at the time, people were pissed, man. Like, you mean to tell me that not only does Doc Ock win, but he's the Spider-Man that we're going to be following from this day forward? But thankfully, Peter Parker did return, and they did it in a very plausible and meaningful way. But at the time, I was ready to throw hands somebody's way. And I tell you guys this to let you know that people have had problems with other Spider variants that aren't Miles Morales. In fact, I would argue to say that there is oversaturation when it comes to different variations of Spider-Man. Like back in the day, yeah, you get your occasional Miguel O'Hara or Spider-Man Noir, but nowadays it almost feels like they're pumping out a new Spider variant every other week. Now we have a Spider-Man who's a cyborg, a Spider-Man who's gay, a fucking T-Rex. And because we have and are still getting more variants of Spider-Man, it feels like the Spider-Man brand is getting cheapened to the point where Peter Parker himself doesn't even feel all that special anymore. So make no mistake, there are legitimate problems with the other Spider-Man derivatives, but the reason why Miles gets the blunt end of the stick is because he is a very unique tokenized character. Not only does he replace the Peter Parker of his universe, but they bring him over to the main universe and they want you to believe that he is on equal footing as Peter Parker Spider-Man. Keep in mind, Marvel does not want you to think of Miles as a derivative of Spider-Man, but rather the Spider-Man along with the Spider-Man. This is indicative to his comics that were at the time dropping Miles Morales from the title and simply calling it Spider-Man. Also, a lot of people like to claim that this character was super popular, and that's how come they crossed him over into the 616. That is completely false. If we look at the Comic-Con numbers right here, we can see that the first issue of Miles Morales' Ultimate Spider-Man comics did almost 90,000 units. But by the time of the second issue, that number drops by a third, and that's in September of 2011. It's strange, I thought Miles was supposed to be this ever so popular character, and yet, in 1 month, he has a 30% drop. And if we look over here in 2016, the books that were being made with him when he crossed over into the 616, he's doing over 100,000 for his first issue, but by the time we get to the second issue, there's another steep decline of about 40%. Fast forward to 2019, and Miles Morales is all the way at the 525th spot on his second issue with not even 40,000 units. Meanwhile, if we go up, we see that the Amazing Spider-Man was running laps around Miles at this time, come 2020, and the Amazing Spider-Man is doing twice as much as Miles Morales Spider-Man is. Heck, even Spider-Woman is doing better than Miles at this time. Granted, that is an issue 1, but you get what I'm saying. Miles has never been this super popular character character like people claim that he was. There's initial intrigue in the character, but after that it drops. I mean, think about it. Miles does not have any iconic storylines to speak of. I mean, the only storylines of Miles that I can think of right off the top of my head are storylines that Peter Parker himself has already gone through, such as the Clone Saga and Spider-Man No More. And the thing is, the majority of Miles Morales fans don't like him because of his comic books. They like him because of how he's portrayed in movies, video games, and other mediums like that. And let's talk about that real quick. I will say this, Miles was more tolerable in Spider-Man PS4. Granted, I do still have some problems with him, but they did try to make him feel like more of an organic character in the video games. So I'll give him that one. However, then we get to his own video game, and a lot of problems that someone like me has with this character persist in that game, such as Peter Parker Spider-Man having to be written out of the story in order for Miles to shine, or how his extra powers give him a massive leg up. For example, at the beginning, you're facing off against the Rhino, and Peter gets cucked, but Miles is able to defeat him thanks to his Venom Blast powers. And the reason I bring that up specifically is because the Spider-Man of that universe has faced off against the Rhino multiple times and won. And yet the one time Peter is with Miles, he just so happens to lose so that Miles can win. Just saying, not the best introduction to Miles' powers. Also, the baseline story is pretty similar to how it was in the Spider-Man PS4 video game. Like, hear me out, you have evil billionaire man doing evil billionaire man things, and you also have a character that is close to Spider-Man who happens to be the main antagonist of the video game, who wants to get revenge on evil billionaire man for doing evil billionaire man things, and in the process are endangering a city full of people. Now don't get me wrong, the game is a fun game to play, but the story is severely lacking. But then we get over to the movies, right, and this is the medium in which people know Miles Morales the most. And I remember in my Across the Spider-Verse video, somebody had asked me if I thought Miles was a bad character in the original Into the Spider-Verse movie, and I think I forgot to reply to the comment, but the short answer is yes, and I'll explain why. So first up, Miles' introduction in the film is decent. I'll give him that. But after that, I can't really give him much credit. For one thing, the people behind this movie knew that Miles Morales alone could not carry a movie. So they gave him a supporting cast of other different Spider people from the Spider-Verse, which was smart. But at the same time, it also shows that even the people behind this movie know that Miles Morales cannot sell by himself. Having said that, while they do have different Spider-Man in this movie, aside from Miles, the story is contrived in such a way where Miles ends up being the hero without actually going through any type of hero's journey. So, for example, at one point in time, Miles gets tied up because he's pretty crap at being Spider-Man, and so the other Spider people decide that they're gonna take on Kingpin and Miles can just sit on his ass. Because again, Miles is a liability, he's not that good at being Spider-Man. However, then his dad comes in, gives him a talk, and he's just amazing at being Spider-Man now. It's like a switch got flipped. Not only that, but because the other Spider Deviants are outside of their respective universes, they start glitching, and we're told that if they don't get back to their universes in time, they could potentially glitch out of existence. Which it seems like this is being used more or less as a plot device so that Miles can be propped up as the main hero, because were it not for this little caveat, all the different Spider people could just gang up on Kingpin and instantly win. Instead, we get a balls to the walls fight between just Miles and Kingpin, which is also kinda contrived because Kingpin slams his fist down on Miles in a similar way to how he slammed it down on his universe's Spider-Man and killed him, but Miles, he tanks it! And even Kingpin is stunned to the point of just not kicking this kid's ass anymore. And of course, Miles just wins because Venom Blast. And I get why they can't give Miles a cohesive arc in these Spider-Verse movies because he's sharing screen time with other Spider-Man, but that's the double-edged sword of these Spider-Verse films. That being why it may be fun for you to see all these different Spider people on screen together. It diminishes Miles as a character whether you realize it or not, and Miles was already being diminished as a character because he had big shoes to fill with him taking the place of Peter Parker. And if anything, Peter Parker's Spider-Man probably would have been a much better lead for the Spider-Verse films because Peter Parker's Spider-Man doesn't need an introduction. We already know who he is, we know what he's about, and because of that we'd have a much easier time crafting a narrative around him as opposed to Miles Morales, a character that you have to put in extra work to make work. Now I pretty much said my piece about the Across the Spider-Verse film, but to reiterate some points that I made, due to the fact that they're using canon events as these be-all end-all things that happen to every single Spider-Man across space and time, and if they don't happen then the universe is going to collapse on itself, in the third movie, again, either Miguel O'Hara is going to be right and Miles is going to look like a punk, or Miles is going to be right and every single Spider-Man in existence is going to look like a punk. But either way, somebody is going to get punked, and either way, Miles is not going to look good between either outcome. Now, you can like Miles in those films all you want, but it doesn't change the fact that his character, objectively objectively speaking, is not all that great. And before I end this video, I would be completely remiss without talking about the final talking point that Miles Morales apologists like to use when defending this character, that being, characters have shared the same name as other characters, or have taken over for other characters, or have used the mantle of other characters, and quote unquote nobody's ever complained.
Wrong, sir. Wrong!
And this is an absolute bald-faced lie. Plenty of people were annoyed that Falcon and Jane Foster were taking over for Captain America and Thor respectively. I've already talked about Ben Reilly and Superior Spider-Man, so you cannot make that objectively false claim. And even when somebody is taking over the mantle of a character, the original character always comes back. So for example, Batman has been replaced by Jean-Paul Valley and Dick Grayson before, but he always comes back to the role of Batman. And for people who are talking about how multiple characters share the same name, like for example the Green Lanterns, the thing that you have to understand is, but the Green Lanterns as they're known today, they act as intergalactic police. So of course there's going to be multiple Green Lanterns. But even at that, they all have their own unique identities. Hal Jordan is completely different from John Stewart. John Stewart is completely different from Kyle Rayner. Kyle Rayner is completely different from Guy Gardner. Similarly with someone like The Flash, for example, while yeah, there are multiple different speedsters such as Wally West, Jay Garrick, or Impulse, each of them has something different that deviates them from each other. For example, Jay Garrick hails from a different Earth entirely and he can't tap into the Speed Force by himself. So while he's the original Flash, he is the slowest Flash out of all of them. And originally, Wally West was made with the intention of giving Barry Allen a sidekick. He, like Dick Grayson, just so happened to grow up, and yes, he did take over for the Flash, but only after Barry Allen had died during Crisis on Infinite Earths. Also, during the New 52, they actually race swapped Wally West into a black person. And then they kept him around when they brought back Wally West during the launch of DC Rebirth and tried to claim, oh, well that isn't Wally West, that's actually Wallace West. And needless to say, people had something to say about that as well. The reason why they don't say as much about him as they do about Miles Morales is because he is not that popular of a character. In fact, none of the Flashes are as popular of a character as Spider-Man, and they have relegated him for the most part to the background. Whereas with Miles Morales, even if he was a derivative of Spider-Man in the same way that Spider-Punk is a derivative of Spider-Man, where he has his own universe and stays in his own lane, the brand recognition alone makes him leaps and bounds more popular than Black Wally West. So while Black Wally West did in fact replace the original Wally West, and that in and of itself is criminal, the fact remains is that Spider-Man was an even more grievous offense given the character's popularity. So to be clear, people have talked shit about race swaps, replacements, and deviants long before Miles was put onto the field, and even after Miles was put onto the field. The thing is, when you chalk it up, Miles has had every single advantage handed to him both in and out of universe. As I said before, both Brian Michael Bendis and Axel Alonso have shilled out to the media on multiple occasions talking about how they love the fact that they have a Spider-Man that's a person of color and now their little kids can see themselves as the character. Hell, they even broke their one rule of the Ultimate Universe, that being that characters that die stay dead, and brought back Ultimate Peter Parker, all for the sake of validating Miles as Spider-Man. Then they bring the 616 Universe Spider-Man over just so he can validate Miles as Spider-Man. And then at the end of Secret Wars 2015, they integrate Miles into the 616 universe. And it's the most contrived thing ever, right? Like during the events of Secret Wars, Doctor Doom became semi-omnipotent, and he had basically taken over the world, or at the very least the remnants of the worlds that had been destroyed. It's a long story, right? But that's not the point right now. The heroes, of course, were looking to stop Doom and set things back to normal, and both Peter Parker and Miles Morales are trying to figure out what exactly is the source of Doom's power, and they find Molecule Man. And Molecule Man has been starving for weeks. So he asks the two Spider-Men, do you have anything to eat? And Miles motherfucker Morales just so happens to have a hamburger wedged in his ass. I don't care if they said it was in his pocket, man. There is no way they could hide that hamburger anywhere other than his ass cheeks. But anyway, Miles gives Molecule Man this rusty, crusty, moldy, old, nasty patty. And he is so grateful for this act of kindness from Miles that by the time everything is said and done with Doctor Doom, Molecule Man not only transfers Miles over to the 616 universe, but also the entirety of Miles' inner circle gets transferred over to the 616 universe. Heck, he even does him one better and brings his mom and uncle back from the dead. And no one questions anything because the way it was done, Miles as well as everyone else in the 616 believes that Miles was there the whole time. And so it's just kind of one of those things in comics where they ask you to not not question it. And when you list off all these objective truths about the Miles Morales character, they resort to their final card, which is, you just a racist. It doesn't matter how factual your points are when it comes to this character. If you don't like him, you are racist. And I hate to break it to these clowns, but your racist is not an argument. Your feelings towards Miles Morales are not an argument. Nobody's saying that you can't like the Miles Morales character. You can have the biggest heart-on for the dude. I personally don't care. But what I would ask is that people be honest about why they like Miles Morales. And the fact remains, you like him because he's Black Spider-Man. Okay, fine, whatever. But that doesn't change anything of what I had to say in this video. Nor does it change the sentiment that Miles Morales is Miles Morales and Peter Parker is Spider-Man. But let me know what you guys think. How do you guys personally feel about Miles Morales as a character? Be it comics, movies, games, TV, whatever. As always, support your Emperor by leaving a like and clicking subscribe. Also, follow me on my social media platforms. You wouldn't want to be racist now, would you?